notice because things are changing fast, and we just want this event to happen. Just very briefly for those of you who are not well informed about how the decisions are taken in Europe. Obviously, position of Chief of the Council, Chief of the European Commission is very important, and there will be new Chief of the Commission after the elections. Treaty says that it's a matter of the Council. The Council should take into the account results of European election. The practice in past was that basically Council took into the account the results of European election by ignoring that and trying to find someone who is acceptable for heads of states. The reason, according to some people, was that the Chief of the Commission was someone who was not a problem for people in the Council, but it was not exactly the leader. And there is a concern that Europe needs people with the courage, with the vision that will move things forward. That's why European Parliament a few years ago joined the game and said actually that he wanted to see different result, and the result to make sure that there is impact of European elections on how the post of Chief of the Commission who will be assigned to this job, so that the groups in the European Parliament will propose its candidate, and which group will be winner in the election will try to get through nomination of his so-called Spitzencandidate. Last time there were two Spitzencandidates, proposals for two Spitzencandidates for EPP group. It was Mr. Barnier and Mr. Juncker. For Socialists it was Martin Schulz. As EPP prevailed in the elections, the effort of EPP and also in other people in the Parliament is to make Mr. Schulz President of the Commission, and this is exactly what has happened. So our term is now almost over, and the question is what will be next. Parliament believes that it's important to continue with this practice, to make sure that there is someone who has some link to decision of the people, how they vote in European elections. And it is now up to political groups that believe in this concept to find Spitzencandidates. It used to be rather a matter of the debate behind closed doors, but as now media and people are more interested in the subject, there is more debate about it. So you have maybe noticed few months or weeks ago that there was debate about Mr. Barnier, who is chief Brexit negotiator, that he would like to join the race. Then it was Alex Stubb and Manfred Weber. So we used to have three candidates for EPP, now we have two, because Mr. Barnier has decided that Brexit is such a demanding job that it cannot be merged with his campaign to win the nomination of EPP. Congress in Helsinki is approaching, and people that will be voting in Congress are making the minds how to vote. And obviously, those of you who know the system know that it will be members of parliament and the representative of EPP parties that will decide. But I guess it's quite important that there is more public debate about, or more debate about who should be the best president of the European Commission, and I was very pleased when Alex decided to run, that he said that he would like to very openly discuss what are his position, what are his values, and what he would like to do if he succeeds in nomination. And few weeks ago, he even said that he is very happy to come to Czech Republic and have debate with people from the party, but more importantly with the general public. So I was quite enthusiastic about it, because to bring someone who is representing possibly future of European politics is very helpful, and I'm very happy that this debate about nomination of EPP, like the other party, will not be kept behind the doors, but will be subject of people having opinions, having chance to ask the question. I guess it's a very good thing. So that's why Alex is here. Alex is here to face the questions from people that will be voting in Helsinki, from people that will not be voting in Helsinki. But still, I guess it's very important for us to know who he is. So to make a long story short, Alex, tell us why you are here actually. Small country, the procedure that can be kept well behind the closed doors of party secretariats. but you travel across the Europe, come here, and actually want to talk with people. So, what's your logic?
No, thanks, Luďek, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I guess your question was there, who is Alex, or who are you? Well, to put it very simply, I'm born in 1968, which is a good year for Czech freedom fighters. I'm a father of two. Emily is 17, Oliver is 14. I'm married to a Brit, so our home language is English. I come from a bilingual background, Finnish and Swedish. But my big claim to fame in the Czech Republic is that my dad is the chief talent scout of the National Hockey League for all of Europe. And he has been so since 1983. So he's been in the business for a long time. He's actually 83 years old now, and he still watches 200 ice hockey matches a year. And we're not talking about VIP boxes. We're talking hardcore, small ice hockey rinks around the world, mostly actually in Eastern and Central Europe. He has a scout here in the Czech Republic as well, called Roman Havluj, who's been working for my dad for about 20 years. So every player that goes to the NHL from Europe goes through him, and of course the greatest ever was Jaromir Jagr, number 68, by the way, and did end up playing with Alexander Barkov, a young Finnish guy in Florida Panthers before he moved back here. So that's my real claim to fame. I've been in politics really only 14 years. I joined the party in 2004, and before that I was actually a civil servant and an academic. So I was not a real diplomat, but sort of wannabe diplomat, as our real diplomats here in the front would say. I've always been very involved with EU stuff. You know, I started studying in the United States in 1989 at Furman University, where I became enthusiastic about things European, and then I continued at the Sorbonne because I didn't speak French, and later on at the College of Europe in Bruges, and then I got my PhD from the London School of Economics. So I find myself being very much a late bloomer. I mean, I was never, when I was a kid, I was never into politics or academia. I was, you know, average in school and in gymnasium. You call it gymnasium here as well, yeah? I was interested in three things. They were sports, beer, and girls. And, you know, so I'm just your, you know, average blog. So it's
you are running for EPP, Conservative Christian Party.
I know. I'm in trouble. But this is the land of Budvar, so you know, it would be understood. And actually, my first visit ever to Prague was in 1992, when I had been working as a trainee at Gebruda Langpapierfabrik in Ettringen, close to Bad Wörishofen in Bavaria, and then we took a train here and spent the weekend. We went to a couple of Václav Havel's plays and, you know, drank copious amounts of beer and had a lot of fun and the rest of it. And it's wonderful to see how things keep on changing. Now, that's not my point today, but just so you get my background, a little bit of who I am. I will start by saying, just give you, isn't it best that we just go into a question and answer, I think, instead of a politician giving a monologue. But I will give you just one general observation of why I think it's very important at this day and age to defend what I would call universal or at least European values, which for me are human rights, fundamental rights, tolerance, equality, freedom, liberal democracy, the rule of law, the protection of minorities. And it is this. I think Europe has been dominated for the past century with three basic ideologies, which have to do with values, but also with a system of governance. And the three, of course, are fascism, communism, and then liberalism or liberal democracy, whatever you want to call them. And if you take fascism first, that died in 1945. And out of that grew a bipolar world with two competing ideologies, communism and liberalism. One was based on authoritarian regimes and planned economies and an encroachment of freedom. It was the Soviet Union and its allies. Then either forced or voluntary. And then on the other side, you had the free world or the capitalist model or the liberal democratic model around the United States and its allies. And these two models were competing for the better part of, I guess, 50-ish, 40-ish years. And fortunately, communism in most of its forms died in 1989. And that meant that we were left with one ideology, and that's our model. And I'm a child of 1989. That's when I started studying, and some of you might remember that time. You know, it was an era of hope. It was, you know, Václav Havel. It was Nelson Mandela. East meets West. Velvet Revolution. Freedom, democracy, and everything. Right? I mean, this was the feeling that we had at the time. And people like Francis Fukuyama would be writing books saying, this is the end of history. All 200 nation states in the world, they will revert to liberal democracy, social market economy, and globalization. And of course, you know, I belong to that category as well. I was full of hope. You know, I was reading the New York Times in Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, and following the downfall of the Berlin Wall, and getting really excited and seeing, you know, the Velvet Revolution happening in my eyes. And the only worry I had was, you know, how is the Czech Republic and Slovakia going to do in ice hockey? Getting a bit worried here, and the rest of it. But you know, the whole idea was that, yeah, this was lovely, and I've built my whole life on this. Huh? This model of society and the world, multilateralism, cooperation, values, has been what I've always been about. And I've been really, really lucky because the EU has delivered, right? You know, it exists for 4 reasons: peace, prosperity, security, and stability, and it has delivered pretty much most of that. Now, the big worry I have is that our model of society, liberal democracy, could have started dying in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump and with Brexit. And obviously, with all side effects. I'm not going to look at the root causes, but we can say that the financial crisis put the capitalist model into question and almost destroyed it. And then our incapacity to deal with the migration crisis in 2015 got people a lot scared. So the notion of security and stability weren't there. And when that happens, people start looking for alternative solutions, quite often simple solutions and populistic solutions. And the reason I'm standing on the barricades now and defending these European values is that I feel very strongly about them. And I feel that in times of insecurity, you need some kind of an anchor to latch onto, to say that, okay, you know, we might have our differences, but at least we share these values. And they are, in many ways, our inalienable rights as well. And I hope that we can do that, because I feel that our values are being attacked from outside the EU, Donald Trump, China, and President Xi, Putin, Russia, in different ways. Then from the inside of the EU, you have a lot of populist movements in Europe, both from the right and the left. You know, Poland, Italy, Hungary, Romania. A lot of, yeah, I mean, I'm always very diplomatic and hospitable when I'm visiting countries. I don't get it, but, you know, Finland, you know, we had the true Finns in government. We hugged them to death. They're not in government anymore, but, you know, the bottom line is that this was something caused this, and we need to deal with it in one way or another. So this is basically what I'm here to talk about. There are no simple solutions, but I'm all ears, and hopefully we can have a good conversation. But really, killed fascism in 1945, killed communism in 1989, and hope we didn't kill liberalism in 2016.
So I understand, so this is definitely a thing worth of fighting, but you actually entered into politics a few years before that, when it was not clear that Trump will be there and other things that are now threatening, I believe, our values. So what was motivation at the time? You started, if I'm not mistaken, as a member of European Parliament.
Yeah.
Then you were in different ministerial posts and then ending up as a Prime Minister of Finland.
Yeah, I guess I did forget to tell that part. But yeah, I was member of the European Parliament for 4 years, from 2004 to 2008. And then I was for 8 years in government, actually 3,002 days to be precise. Not that I was counting. I was foreign minister, then I was trade and Europe, and those were good times in life. And then I guess I was supposed to become commissioner, but by accident I became prime minister. And really, I mean it. And then I became finance minister, and then I lost a leadership battle in 2016 and decided to become a backbencher to a good friend. I mean, no hard feelings whatsoever. I mean, quite the contrary, I was very relieved. The reason I went into politics in 2004 was Europe. You know, I was never into national politics. That wasn't my thing. I mean, you'll know me from before. I mean, it was all about Europe. And as a matter of fact, my wife, we once went on a party cruise, you know, on a boat on the Baltic Sea with 2,000 party members, with 2 small children at the time. And my wife had been there for 2 hours. And you know how it can be sort of in November on a cruise with... and she tells me, to the son, 2 hours, Alex, yes dear, can you promise me one thing? Of course, whatever. She says, never ever go into national politics. And sure enough, then in 2008, I you know, was called in as foreign minister. So it was a belief in Europe, and I always believed, you know, when I studied in the U.S., this was for me the big peace project, and Finland had to be a part of the West, and because of the Soviet Union, we could not integrate as much as we wanted. So I've always been a believer. You know, changed a little bit views as you do when you're an academic, civil servant, and then politician, how things work. But I always believed that you know, nothing better could replace this at this particular moment, and that's why I'm probably on the barricades here again.
I see. You know, you are now in the country that is most EU skeptical in the Europe. That is for me a big surprise. But probably this would be subject worth of discussing, but probably not today. Actually, I forgot to welcome here warmly our friends from Finnish embassy that are our dear guests today.
Spying.
But before actually I will give you floor to ask the question, I still have 2 issues that I would like to ask probably. The first one is that actually you know very much Manfred Weber, and you have met many times, and I guess you are to some extent different, but to some extent similar. So you both represent a different, I guess, generation of European policy, with a lot of similarities, passion for Europe, just believe that this is something very important that we must preserve for our kids, but also there are differences. So how you feel that you are running against someone who is representing the country that is probably, at least for the time being, the strongest in the Europe. You are coming from a small country that, geographically speaking, is on periphery. So how it can make a difference, how you feel about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like, you know, Finland against Germany in football, you know, and I kind of hope.
But this Germany or Germany a few years ago? Let's make a difference.
This is a big question, because Finland has now won 4 matches in a row. Estonia twice, and then Hungary and Greece. So not bad.
My German colleagues in parliament said we have lost football, we have lost elections, we have nice weather. It's like Italy.
Yeah, that's not bad, not bad. But I, of course, wish this was an ice hockey match instead. Of course, I mean, you know, numbers matter. And at the end of the day, it's a value-based decision. Now it's quite easy because we're 2 candidates. Yes, both of us are pro-European. Our difference, probably, if you want to box us, is that you know, Manfred is centre-right conservative, and I'm probably a little bit more centre-right liberal. So that would be the difference between the 2 of us. And then, of course, experience is a difference. You know, Manfred and I started in the European Parliament at the same time, 2004. And then 2008, I left and became government minister, and Manfred has continued his, I think, really good career in the European Parliament. And then, of course, you know, there is a difference between a Nordic feminist and a Bavarian male. You know, it's as simple as that. But the nice thing is that we can do this campaign in positive ways. On values, I think both of us are tough, but I'm probably a step tougher because I have very little tolerance for intolerance. And for instance, I have huge problems with the way in which Viktor Orban and his Hungarian Fidesz party has been acting inside our European People's Party. I have a tough time living with that, and I think we need to have a dialogue and talk about it. So obviously there are definitely differences between the 2 of us. But it's nice to be in a sort of a next generation. I know, you know, I'm next generation. I'm 50, and I now have multifocals. So I try to be young, but I'm not really that young anymore. But I think generation is between your ears. I'm a big fan of digitalization and technological development revolution as well, and I think that's going to be very much part of what we should be and do in Europe. And you know, I'm a big fan of Jean-Claude Juncker, and not only because he still has a Nokia phone, but I think we need to move to the smartphone era, if you know what I mean. But you have a Nokia phone as well, no?
Yeah. This is next generation Nokia.
It is.
It's not the original one. But
it's Android.
Don't escape, Alex, that question of small, big country. Because maybe I guess a lot of people here are surprised that someone who is running for one of the most important posts in Europe came to Prague and want to spend here actually half a day talking with people and even coming to speaking to open air event, even when actually you are not now who are deciding about future of Alex, but even some people, if they accept this, they don't understand why you go to Czech Republic, because they just think that in Europe there are big countries and these big guys are making the deals and playing the games and setting the rules, and we are those ones who are seeing the results. And if someone like Juncker makes it, it's because they are part of this game. So how you feel to be thrown into that? Because obviously capacity of big countries to agree on something is big. But at the same time, I still try to convince people in the Czech Republic we are those who are making the decision. What's fantastic on current setting is that we have a chance to influence it. Actually, sometimes even much bigger than there is a strength of our economy, than the size of our country or number of inhabitants. So is there a chance that someone from Scandinavia will become chief of commission? And isn't it that it's a big country deserves this post? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing with European integration and European Union is that we, the small players, actually always punch above our weight. Because if you would have traditional big power politics, a la Yalta, you know, realpolitik, where the big powers of this world take the decisions, we would always be trampled. You saw that, and you have seen it throughout your history. We certainly have felt it in Finland throughout history. So when you get to sit around the table where the decisions are actually made, a lot of it depends on you, yourself, your capacity to negotiate and discuss. That, for instance, is with European members of the European Parliament. I always say, having been one, that if you're an active MEP, you have more power than a government minister. Because if you get an important dossier on the table and you're good at negotiating with the Commission and the member states, you end up doing quite well. Now, then you have to be realistic. Out of the top 5 positions right now, Commission President, he comes from a small country, Jean-Claude Juncker. But then, President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, Poland. High Representative, Federica Mogherini, Italy. President of the ECB, Mario Draghi, Italy. And then President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, Italy. So you can see that there is a little bit of a division. But usually, actually, the President of the European Commission has quite often come from a small state. Of course, we've had, you know, Delors, then Santer from Luxembourg, then Prodi from Italy, then Barroso from Portugal, and now Juncker. So, you know, it goes a little bit back and forth. But the bottom line is the Commission is the guardian of the treaties and should at least find compromises on the member states. By the way, there's one big difference between Manfred Weber and myself. He publicly supports reducing the size of the European Commission. And I personally believe very firmly that every member state should have a commissioner. I don't want to have a commission which doesn't have a German commissioner. Can you imagine a decision on competition policy on Volkswagen or BMW or on climate change without the implication of having a German commissioner there? So yeah, I mean, it's a tough battle, small versus big, but you know, you always have to, you know, give it all you got and then see what happens. It'll be interesting to see what the final outcome in Helsinki is in 3 weeks. And for those who don't know the process, there's 734 delegates from the EPP that take the vote. And then that person becomes the lead candidate for the European elections. And then you try to negotiate, much like a government negotiates, who becomes the Commission President or the sort of Prime Minister kind of a thing. So, you know, it's a long shot, but we'll see how it goes.
At the end, we definitely should ask the question, how likely is it that Spitzencandidate from EPP will actually become the Chief of Commission? But let's open the floor for first discussion. Who wants to ask something? Otherwise, if not, then I will continue, but okay, please.
Hello. My name is Pavel Arazim, and my question is, you already pointed out some differences between you and Mr. Weber, and perhaps they would also concern your approach to Fidesz. You talked about populism and fascism a little bit. I think it's quite worrying that I think we have some fascists, maybe, or populists in European People's Party. What do you think is the right thing to do about Fidesz now? Should we get rid of them, or do you think there's some hope of talking Orban into being a Democrat, or what would you do with it?
Well, I mean, I'm always very careful to use terminology about other people, especially terminology that they have not used of themselves. But I guess we can agree on the fact that Viktor Orban has called himself a supporter of what he calls illiberal democracy. And I, on the other hand, would say that for me, illiberal democracy is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. You cannot be illiberal and a Democrat at the same time. And obviously there are many values which I don't share with Viktor Orban, nor do I share much of the use of language that he has about other human beings, be they coming from other countries, from Brussels, be they coming from Muslim countries, or be they immigrants in general. And I also disagree with what he's doing to academic freedom, Central European University, or to press freedom, or to NGO freedom. And I've always felt very strongly that the whole idea of having a democratic constitution is to protect the minority from the majority, and obviously that can be put into question. So then, to answer, without being a politician, to answer your question, I think we should follow a process, and that process in my mind has three phases with Fidesz. Phase number one is a dialogue, an open dialogue about values, about what Fidesz and Viktor Orban stand for. Second, on the basis of that discussion, I will want to see Fidesz sign a declaration of EPP values. They have to sign on to those values. If they disagree with some of the fundamental values, be they Christian democratic, liberal democratic values, whatever you want to call them, then I think they have to be out. That's phase number three. If they approve those values and live by them, then they can continue to be inside the party. But I do think that this election is also, to a certain extent, a little bit a battle of souls. You know, what kind of a soul does what kind of a heart does the EPP have at the end of the day? You know, do we defend the values that stand us so dear, or are we willing to move, you know, further to the right, as some people would want?
Before going to the next question, let me elaborate a little bit on that, because you talk about the values, but at the same time, you are, compared to me, actually, in politics much more longer. But I quickly learned that politics is about compromises, and about finding the difference between good compromise and a bad compromise. If you don't do good compromises, you can't agree. You can't move something unless you basically run everything. You have a majority, constitution majority, or anything like that. That's these days not very likely. But if you lose the sense where the bad compromises are starting, then you become opportunistic, and you can exchange basically your soul for power. So. And you talk very much about the values, and we have many meetings together now. So how to make sure that you really keep the values, but at the same time as the politic you can actually perform, you can deliver. Because without some sense for compromises, it's just not possible.
Yeah, this basically means that you have to compromise, but there have to be some red lines. And for me, you know, red lines with values have to do with two things. One is the way in which you behave towards others. As I said, I have zero tolerance for intolerance. I have zero tolerance for hate speech, or zero tolerance for inciting fear. You know, life is tough enough for politicians to take cheap points by inciting fear in difficult situations. I think politicians should be inciting hope and pragmatic solutions. The second one is the legal issue. For instance, right now Hungary is under procedure under Article 7, which has to do with academic freedom, and the Central European University has to do with freedom of assembly of NGOs and the freedom of press.
77 points in the resolution.
Exactly, quite a few. I did get a long list of refuting those 77 points also from my friends at Fidesz. But I am pragmatic in the sense that, you know, I, for instance, sat down with the Hungarian EPP delegation for 1 hour in Strasbourg to discuss these issues very, very openly. And at the end of the day, you know, we should not compromise on values, but we should find a solution. And if we don't find a solution, then we should just agree to disagree and part ways. It's as simple as that. I've dealt with populists myself, and as I've said before, we hugged them to death in Finland. You know, the true Finns came into government with 3 promises. No more austerity, no more money to Greece, and no more migration. This was in 2015. They came to government with me and my party and the Centre Party. And first thing I did as finance minister, pushed through probably the toughest austerity program in the history of Finnish economic policy. Secondly, I bailed out Greece for a 3rd time in the summer of 2015. And then thirdly, we, by a chance of history, had the biggest migration crisis since World War II. And the popularity of the true Finns halved. The leader of the true Finns had been a leader for 20 years, Timo Soini, the big guy who is our foreign minister. It's actually, I think he's a good guy. He did not want to be the leader anymore, and then a guy who had been condemned for hate speech was elected as chairman, and then we said, that's it, this is a red line, goodbye, you're not in government anymore. And their party split into 2, and the rest is history. So, you know, you compromise to a certain point, and then you just draw the line.
Okay, so we have a question there, if you can, with Mike.
Hello, my name is Miguel. I came from Spain. I'm doing an internship with Top 9 International Office, thanks to the Erasmus program. So you imagine that I'm really pro-European. And I think that healthy competition is fundamental in politics, and especially in the EPP, in our party. So well done for that decision. The center-right has to be opened to good debates among candidates and members. So it's a really good idea to have these meetings. Let's discuss these ideas and our common European project. And it is obvious that there are some small differences between EPP members, and especially about the future of the EU. You mentioned it with Manfred Weber about the size of the Commission. And if you finally get the nomination for Spitzenkandidaten, what will you do to unify those views under the same project? And do you think it will be difficult to unify that views?
Well, thanks. I mean, first of all, thanks for the question, and thanks for your observations, all of which I agree with. And as a matter of fact, I have a lot of very close friends from Partido Popular in Spain. Íñigo Méndez de Vigo, who was your Minister of Education, Culture and Sports and spokesman of the previous government, was one of my mentors in the European Parliament in 2004. Again, you know, the northeastern corner of Europe meeting the southwestern corner of Europe, and Íñigo took me under his wings. He was a senior member of the European Parliament at the time. And we're still in touch. And to be honest, you will find some parts of that program which have been commented by him and changed by him. And I just met Pablo Casado, your new leader. I met him now twice, and I think he's an example of a next generation European leader. So interestingly enough, I feel that Partido Popular has a lot in common with Kokoomus, my party back home. Now, having said that, how would I unify the party? The first issue that I start with always is values, and I do admit that we have a slight split now with some of our party leaders from parties. It's not Spain is not part of them, but the line that Fidesz and Hungary takes is a little bit different from what you would probably see Top 9 take, or the line of Boyko Borisov in Bulgaria might be a little bit, but these are differences that can be ironed out. But I do think there are a few issues that I would pay close attention to when it comes to party compromise. we can talk technology and climate change there, but there are two specific issues. One is the euro, and the other one is migration. And I think on both we need more solidarity. On migration, it's easier to argue because you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a political scientist to understand that migratory pressures come from the south. So that means that we need to share the burden in one way or another, and you'll see some proposals in my program as well. If that sharing is not based on humanitarian asylum quotas, then it should be based on flexible solidarity, so some kind of other mechanism to pitch in. The second issue is the euro. That's a little bit more complicated because all finance ministers and prime ministers are responsible to their own taxpayers. And if there's someone who, for one reason or other, has violated the rules and regulations of the Stability and Growth Pact, it's very difficult to argue at home and say, hey, don't worry about it. They were able to have expansionary fiscal policies and pump money into the system, or they were able to have lax banking rules, and you're going to have to pay for them. So that's why I think that before we move towards mutualization, which I think should be the end state, of a banking union, we need to make sure that the rules are in place. I am in favor of more mutualization. Of course, my argument is made a hell of a lot weaker when you look at the example of what Salvini and Italy is doing right now. When you are in good economic times and a government says that, as a matter of fact, we're going to have a budget deficit of 2.4% per year for 3 years, which means 40 billion euros of debt per year in the country. And you know that you have a banking system where the banks own 17% of 17% of their balance sheet is in sovereign debt, in country government debt, in bonds. Then you sort of shake your head and listen, man, if you want mutualization and if you want help, and you have 2,300 trillion euros worth of bonds floating around in the world, and you're increasing your debt levels, and your debt level is already now 40% of GDP. It's difficult to argue. But my message is, do it on values, and then focus on migration and the euro.
Before next question, let me continue also with this one, because if you would become chief of the European Commission, it's not only up to you to unify EPP, because this will not be your job. This will be a point of people of EPP, but to come with some initiative. And Jean-Claude Juncker was actually quite vocal in some issues, and I would maybe highlight just one. And this is the necessity to strengthen the position of European Union in foreign policy. And just to say the example, I will not go for something sophisticated, and this is probably our fail to on time look at the Syria that actually was at the core of migration crisis. But let's talk, for example, about Russia, because Russia, this is the case where I guess we desperately need strong, clear foreign policy of EU. Well, now we are fully dependent on unanimity of the decision of foreign ministers. So first of all, what's your view on EU and Russia? And the second, if you became next Jean-Claude Juncker, will you keep this line of proposing strengthening of EU foreign policy?
The short answer to the first question is tough. The short answer to the second question is yes. EU-Russia, tough.
So you can elaborate a little bit.
Yes. No, I will elaborate on both. On the first one on EU-Russia, I mean, obviously I come from a country which has 1,300 kilometers of border with Russia. So we know a thing or two of how to deal with Russians. And our relationship has, for all intents and purposes, been fairly good and constructive over the years. In many ways, not for altruistic reasons on the Russian side, but mainly because I felt that they have always needed at least one stable democracy as their neighbor, because otherwise Russians' policy against their neighbors is to have as much instability and incite as much fear as possible, right? But in the Finnish case, they do that, but they do it perhaps a little bit more discreetly than they do right now. I belong to the category of people who felt in the early 1990s that Russia might change course, become more liberal, more democratic, and change its foreign policy. And then I was one of the first ones, especially in Finland in 2008, after my experience in mediating peace in the war in Georgia, to say that, sorry, I was wrong. Russia brought power politics back to European borders. by engaging in a war with Georgia and then at the end of the day annexing both South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And of course,
long time before Ukrainian crisis.
it was a long time before the Ukrainian crisis, but that then sort of died as a crisis because of Lehman Brothers in September 2008. And then, of course, Russia did exactly the same thing, again after the Olympics, and this time in Crimea and then in eastern Ukraine. So I think, with Russia, there just has to be tough love. We have to continue our sanctions policy, and we have to be steadfast with the policies that we have with them in general. The tough thing is obviously that nowadays the line between war and peace is blurred. So, it's difficult to distinguish between the two, and information wars, cyber wars, and others we have to fend off. Secondly, European foreign policy. Yeah, I think we need to do a lot more. I've always felt that, it's one of the most difficult policies to push forward, but we do well in some issues. I would, for instance, argue that on Iran and the nuclear deal, we did quite a good job. And I also believe that given that the United States is now voluntarily marginalizing itself, unfortunately, from world politics, by building walls and rejecting multilateralism and rejecting climate deals and, and so on and so forth, we need to take more responsibility. And for me, that means that we need to do more on our own in foreign and security policy. Probably on foreign security policy, we deal with countries a little bit differently than the US. We're probably a little bit less aggressive. We don't try to force democracy in the way in which the US did, for instance, in Afghanistan and elsewhere, although, of course, we were allied and partners with them. But yeah, I would like to see a common European defense at the end of the day. I would like to see us being much more active in cybersecurity, in artificial intelligence defense, and these types of futuristic issues, and I'm sure we'll be able to do it. And I say this as someone who is a strong advocate of Finnish NATO membership. We're not members of NATO, unfortunately, but I think the relationship between the EU and NATO, and I don't need to tell the Czech, needs to be as close as possible.
But given current circumstances, sorry for one more intervention, there is unanimity of the votes, and there are some countries that strongly believe that lifting or easing the sanctions with Russia will make the business better, the growth better. There are some countries that believe so. There are some groups in many countries that believe so. So how would you contra-argue as the head of the Commission?
Well, I would say that if we don't stick to international law, international rules, and international institutions, and if you allow for states to basically become rogue states and annex territories of other states, and then continue to do business with them, I think we're unprincipled. Then we open a door which should not be open, because if you don't have a rules-based system, you will have very little left. Fortunately, the sanctions, you need unanimity to lift them. So as long as that takes place or is the case, and as long as Russia continues to drive the types of policies it does, I think I don't see the sanctions being lifted in the foreseeable future. Unfortunately, economies are quite quick to adjust, and we're already seeing that. Finland was a big trader with Russia, and now it's very low. So it's understandable.
Okay, please.
Good evening. So I'm Catherine. I'm a member of a French political party which is close to top 09. And also I worked... Non, c'est pas les Républicains. Okay. Parti libéral-démocrate. We are a small party, but pro-European and like you. And also I work for the European Commission since 1997 as an expert. So I'm not really a civil servant. So my fear is that the European Commission is attacked from many parts of the world. But I think that I'm just wondering, and I wanted to get your feeling, if the European Commission really reacts the good way to these attacks. Because the reaction we can state now is that she's a kind observer. There is no really planned communication so that it can be, it can stay the attractive part of the world it has always been. So how can we communicate the right way to these people who attack us everywhere? And here in Czech Republic, I'm very, very happy to see that there are people here. Really, for me, it's a very, very wonderful testimony because the European Commission here is very silent. So how can we make the statement of Martin Schulz, who said that he inherited a Europe from the past which was good, and that he did shit things with it? How can we make it be wrong? Sorry, I'm a little bit tired. A long week.
No.
Thanks you.
No. It's a good and fair observation. I think. I mean, first of all, I think the Commission is much better at defending itself than what it used to be, and the Commission is much better at communicating than what it used to be. And the way in which I've seen Commission communication over the years is that first, the philosophy was every day out of the news is a good day. Yeah. Second was, well, let's start bringing the Union closer to its citizens. Right? It was this sort of as if people would really want to be close to the European Union. I mean, Ludek and I do, but the rest of the world are sensible, and they probably don't. And now, actually, they're a little bit more active. And I think it takes two ways on the communication side. One is a modern way of communication. You start seeing this a lot more nowadays. You know, they come out with a proposal. You know, before it used to be, we have a green paper on the odometers of 2- to 3-wheeled motor vehicles, which shall be in the interest of motor associations around Europe. Here we present you with the green paper. It is 157 pages long. Read it and enjoy it, kind of a thing. Whereas now, you know, they go much more visual, and they have little mimes here and memes, and they have tweets, and you know, it's not bad, not really that bad. So communication has to improve, and I think a lot of the commissioners need to be, you know, more positive and open in their communication, and you know, not too bland. And then the other one is actually the issue of information wars and fake news, and that's probably a more serious issue, where of course now the Commission, for what I understand, already has a unit which is trying to fight trolls. And there are suggestions coming out now, I think in the European Council, whereby you would actually face sanctions if you are clearly distributing fake news and going into information wars and these kinds of things. So, you know, the Commission is getting much better at it, and I think the rest of the world is as well. I mean, I've always been for modern communication. I remember when I joined the Foreign Ministry, and I became Foreign Minister in 2008, I was the only foreign minister with an open blog. In other words, people could communicate. And then I started to tweet, and I got all of our ambassadors to be on Twitter. I mean, nowadays, if you're not, I mean, if you're an ambassador and you're not on Twitter, I mean, you're kind of a loser, right? Or you know, we didn't have Facebook pages, and then suddenly we noticed with different kinds, you know, like the tsunami, we dealt with really badly and got. I wasn't foreign minister, of course, then, but the communication really sucked and got criticized. So I went very strong. You know, whenever there was a crisis, I would be communicating openly about what was going on, and you know, things change. We get better at this. It's not easy, but I think the communication is much better than what it used to be in communication. They stopped this sort of bland stuff. It's more direct now.
You know, better, I wonder if it's enough, because our competitors, those who are not limited by the truth, but that can spread the lies, are obviously much more efficient. And that's not because of only spreading of news is always much easier, because if you lie, you know, all universe is yours. You can say whatever. If you don't lie, then you are limited by that very unfortunate truth. But also it seems to me that not only, I don't want to talk about commissions, but I will talk, let's say, about EPP parties, that we are considered those who really will not lie, who will say the truth. But we must do that very smart way, and it seems that we don't know how to do it. It's not enough to be on Twitter and have a Facebook, but to find out the way how to spread what is done the way that people understand. So obviously, if you will succeed in Helsinki, then it's only 1/3 of the journey. The second third is that EPP must win, and then Parliament must convince Council that it will be EPP candidate. So how those, and frankly, EPP, those of you who know European politics, EPP is now leading force. We have now more than 200 of votes. We have reasonable coalition potential. We have many people in the council and so on. So that means that we have power, but at the same time we have responsibility. Yeah. Most of the things that happen in Europe are because we want it or we accept it. So how should EPP communicate? What should communicate in order to make sure that it will win elections and Spitzenkandidat of EPP will have chance to run the Commission?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question, and perhaps two answers or observations. The first thing, and this might sound a little bit strange coming from a Nordic, I think sometimes we try to be too rational about the European Union, whereas actually we should be a little bit more emotional. You know, we should have a little bit more heart and a little bit more feel than head. And if you want to do a simple division to it, you know, human beings, we like facts, that's fine, but we like stories even better. And you know, when you can combine facts and stories, then you do a good job. And the example that I always give is that when did people feel truly European? Well, probably, you know, in the Czech Republic and in Slovakia, it started with the Velvet Revolution and the possibility to getting into the European Union and feeling part of something bigger. That's at least partially what it was for Finland as well. But people felt quite European after the election of Trump and Brexit, actually. That's when you started having emotional attachments. I mean, the United Kingdom, which has been quite silent on the pro-European side, suddenly you have, you know, millions of people in the street, hundreds of thousands expressing their views on Europe constantly. And when it becomes a binary issue of in or out, then people feel very strongly that, listen, we live in the world of internet. Being against the EU is a little bit like being against the internet. It's stupid. You know, you can always leave the internet, but it's probably best to try to impact the content of internet instead, right? And then it became very sort of emotional. Now, second observation is you're right. This is a triathlon. First you swim to the EPP Congress, then you cycle to the European elections, and then you run and put up a European Commission. So it's a long shot. I would continue to communicate about Europe the way in which I do currently. Some of you might know or might have seen I'm quite active on social media. I really like these types of town hall discussions and debates. I try to do as much media as possible, and I try to communicate in a way in which people understand. And it's not me trying to do that, but I have to communicate in a way in which I understand myself. You know, because sometimes politicians speak language that they probably don't understand themselves. And if they don't understand it, then, you know, folks on the other side are not going to understand it either.
Actually, as you mentioned triathlon, you do triathlon, so which one is the most difficult part for you?
Well, the run is always the toughest, but cycling for me is the easiest, and I'm not a very good swimmer, so we'll see. You know, we'll see how this goes.
Okay, so.
Good afternoon. My name is Jan Tichy, and I would like to ask you, what do you think that is the most dangerous thing for the comfortable future of the EU?
If I can put it into one word, I would say it irrelevance. And by that I mean, if you think about it, you know, we haven't talked about this today yet, but the digital revolution or the technological revolution, and if I'm allowed to answer this a little bit longer than I would normally, my thinking is that artificial intelligence, robotization, digitalization, self-learning, 3D printing, Internet of Things, the whole basket of the fourth industrial revolution or the digital revolution will change everything. And in comparison to previous industrial revolutions, this one is actually disruptive and fast. Previous ones have been incremental and slow. And even if they were incremental and slow, they caused huge revolutions. First industrial revolution took a long time, really didn't get going until, you know, steam engine and electricity. But then when it came, it led to Marxism, right? And Russian revolutions and the rest of it. And there it was easy to address because a human being had not only value as a human being, but also economic value. He or she was a worker, and Marxism addressed workers' rights, working hours, healthcare, salaries, and the rest of it. Now, the fourth industrial revolution is a hell of a lot more complicated. Because though employment rates are highest that we've ever had in Europe, unemployment rates are quite high, and what we're doing in this revolution is actually getting rid of a lot of traditional jobs at a pace at which we used to not do it. And Yuval Harari, he's written Homo sapiens, Homo Deus, and now 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, all worth reading, really. His argument is, and I use his words here, is he's afraid that we are in the process of creating what he calls a useless class, or an irrelevant class. In other words, human beings who lose their own purpose of life because they see that they have no economic value or political value. And for me, that's the deepest travesty and risk of any human being. Because we all, at the end of the day, want to live, happy and fulfilling lives. And meaningful lives in many ways. And when you lose meaning in life and you become irrelevant, then you start doing things that you are not going to be a very constructive player in society. So this is why I say that irrelevance is probably the biggest risk. And that's why I'm so strong in the program, well, strong, but at least I stress in the program the importance of the transition inside the digital revolution, that we need to do right things when it comes to the future of work. We need to do right things when it comes to the future of science or the future of politics or the future of media, because they're all driven by technology. And given that things are moving so fast, and it's always markets being faster than legislators, we really need to be on the ball here. Just a final point on the work issue. I mean, the example that I sometimes give is, it's easy when you turn 50, you look both backwards and forwards. But I had a friend who told me that, Alex, don't look at what Europe looked like in 1968, but look at what the world looked like in 1918. I said, okay, I'll do it. So I did. And one of the observations that I had, which just shows how fast things go, is that 100 years ago, the main mode of transport here in Prague was not those old cars that you see here, but it was horse and a carriage, right? And isn't it funny? Okay, then probably in -- the main mode of transport was, I don't know,
Škoda and Žiguli.
Yeah, exactly. In Finland it was probably a Lada, and the rest of it. But in 1918, or 2018, 100 years later, isn't it strange that the horses are actually being transported by the cars? And not only that, if it's a really sophisticated car, it has biodiesel, which has horse shit in it, and give it another 50 years, you and I will not be allowed to have driver's licenses, and we will be transported by self-driving autonomous vehicles. So what I'm trying to say is that, we're now coming to the transition when, the Czech taxi driver, bus driver, tram driver, train driver, air pilot, he's not going to have a job in a few years, huh? And if we don't take this transition well, and these people start feeling irrelevant, then we're in trouble.
But how to make sure that in this transition Europe will play an important role? Because obviously this is the problem that will hit everyone, but those of you who will be strong in these technologies, they will be able to replace the loss, but some gains, and you know that we are discussing, for example, very much situation vis-à-vis China, because China is using hard powers of central plant economy to just order actual European firms to transfer the know-how and R&D to China. That, in my view, is first of all irresponsible from the firms and dangerous, but at the same time it's their business decision, and in free market economy they can do it. They can't do it in China because this is not free market economy. So how to react in short run to the threat that we will not be only hit by the consequences of that, but we will be hit only by the loss of those firms who will be benefit from this transition.
No, this is the key question: how we deal with this whole transition. When I was finished as government minister and before I started working at the European Investment Bank, I had the honor of being a columnist for the Financial Times, and I had a very regular column. And one of the topics of my column was a bit provocative, I admit. It was called "For China, Europe is the New Africa." And the thinking here was that much like the Chinese mined African raw materials, they're now mining R&D, they're mining copyrights, patents, and the rest of it. Now, there are two things you do in this kind of a situation. One is that you regulate. You regulate in a smart way, not necessarily by protecting your industries, but at least making sure that if the Chinese start hitting, for instance, defense or military intelligence industries, you stop that. And you stop it together, not just by having a check, the commercial authority which says this is not possible. It has to be communal. The second one is that you make such rules and regulations. You make such rules and regulations which at the end of the day have to be followed by the Chinese. So because we prefer to be rule makers rather than rule takers, and we're actually a superpower of regulation. So we should do that. And the third thing that you do, I would argue, is to make laws and legislation which facilitates innovation and helps companies to stay here. We have more incubators, more startups, and these kinds of things. Of course, it's going to be tough to fight against the Russian, the Chinese on this, but it's a good way of doing it and trying to find the balance.
Okay, please.
Thank you for the word. My name is Klára Votavová. I work now for the Office of the Government here. And actually I have a follow-up question on your digitalization. I would like to know your position on regulating the online platforms or big tech companies, specifically in terms of taxation and responsibility for content. And my other question, which takes it away from this topic, is actually the Spitzenkandidaten process, because I would really love to have the opportunity to vote for the president of the commission myself, but even with this Spitzenkandidaten, I actually can't, and I would have to vote for many different parties according to which country I come from in order to actually, secure you in the position. So do you think that the pan-European candidate list would actually be the step forward in terms of this? Or do you generally believe in the Spitzenkandidaten process, that it makes it more democratic?
I mean, I think two very big questions at the same time, two very good ones. Now, there's a wonderful book written by Erik Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee. They're both professors at the MIT. The first one, the first book they wrote was about robotization in general. But the second one is even more interesting, and it's called Platform or Machine Platform Crowd. And the basic argument of that book is that we're moving and transitioning in our economies from a society which finds a tension between machine and brain. So more and more of the tasks that our brain used to do are taken over by machines. Yeah? Secondly, and this is more important to your question, we're moving away from an economy which is purely based on productivity of services or productivity of goods towards platforms. For instance, Facebook doesn't own content. Airbnb doesn't own real estate. Uber doesn't own cars yet, really. So platform economy, if you will. And then the last bit is crowd. So instead of just having individual decisions, you crowd and source. Now, the reason I mentioned the book is not just to say that I've been an avid freak of the subject for the past 3 years, and I've read some of the stuff and really find it fascinating. But it is to say that I've been trying to get my mind around, also as former finance minister, on new models of taxation. And I've come to the conclusion that, in order for welfare states to be sustainable, you need to have a strong tax base. And given that that tax base is in the process of eroding, you need to start finding new ways of taxing which are not detrimental to the economy. And if and when data is the new gold and the new oil, I do believe that at the end of the day, we're going to have to start finding taxation models which plug in to data in all of its various formats. So my answer would be that yes, we need to start to find ways of taxation in that field. But I'm open for all good ideas as well on this. I'm not well enough versed, although I'm a banker nowadays, in the sort of taxation models that could be used. Now, then your second question on Spitzenkandidat. First of all, I wish we would get rid of the Spitzenkandidat or Spitzenkandidaten term, and not because it's German. German is a beautiful language, but because it just doesn't ooze sex appeal, as one would say. I think it would be much nicer to talk about, presidential primaries, much like they do in the United States. Of course, we're far away from the United States when it comes to this. Now, the way in which I'd like you to think about the whole process, I'm simplifying, is to say that we're in the process of electing the Prime Minister of Europe, not the President of the Europe. The President of the Europe is the President of the European Council, yeah? With limited powers, but nevertheless. Now, the Prime Minister of a given country, no matter where he or she comes from, will have to be elected from an electoral district, right? You don't always get a Prime Minister that's from Prague. It could come from somewhere else. And then I understand that not everyone gets to elect the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, even if you're Czech. Now, what you, of course, then do to compensate that is to vote for top 09, right? This is a bit of a commercial break, but a good one at that.
Highly appreciated.
Yeah, so if you think that I'm cool and you'd like to see me if I beat Manfred Weber in this electoral campaign, then obviously the idea is that, okay, we like that Alex guy or we don't, therefore we will vote for top 09 because we know that then they will get more people in the European Parliament, and then that basically means that he's more likely to get a majority there. Now, that's linked then to transnationalists. The problem that I have, and I'm a very avid pro-European, the problem that I have with transnationalists is I pose the question, okay, where else in the world do they have transnational lists? The United States? No? The House of Representatives, Senate, they're state-based. There's no, well, of course you have, people elected in Washington, D.C., but the bottom line is that there are no transnational lists. So in that sense, this is one of the issues where I disagree, for instance, with Macron, and with many federalists, actually. I can't get my way around it. Now, of course, then and in any case, I don't mean to offend anyone, but I don't like lists. In Finland, we have a system which is purely based on personal popularity. And for European elections, the whole country is the sort of voting region. So you have to get in only on your personal votes. Of course, we have a list, 20 people from my party, but there's no order in the list. So you don't vote for the list, you vote for the person. And then that person, based on the D'Hondt system, gets in or not. Whereas in a lot of countries you have, okay, I'm number 1 on the list, you're number 2, and for me that's party politics and I'm not a big fan. I don't mean to offend anyone with that, but that's the way you see it. So that's probably why I'm not a big fan of transnational lists. The final point on this, perhaps with the election of the President of the European Commission, you could think about a type of a transnational list whereby you would say that, these people on the transnational list stand for this candidate, these people on the transnational list stand for another one, and perhaps find a system, but a bit complicated.
I would also add that the pure arithmetic advice that the transnational list, it will not be European list, it will be a list of candidates from big countries, because then it will be much easier to get actually sufficient number of votes. So it looks very European, it looks sexy, but if you think about the consequences, I wonder if they are European and if they are sexy. But everyone can have obviously different opinion. Then we have 2 questions there on the back, and then we were slowly getting to the end, because Alex is leaving back to Finland. By Airbus, that will be definitely on time, so we must be careful. This is not like our streaming. Please.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Schiff. I'm a representative of La République En Marche here in Republic Czech. In our country, we did consultation to citizens about what they think about European Union. one of the topics we show very clearly in terms of expectation of citizens is the role of Europe regarding climate change, regarding ecology. And we were talking about the future of Europe, we are talking about the value of Europe. So my question is, why not the value of Europe should not facing and be updating on facing this big challenge, which is global warming? Thank you.
I'm on the same page with you on this one, and you're in the last row, so you probably didn't get my program, did you? Yes. You did. Okay. So all right, you didn't. Okay. So then you'll see that I think my point number 4 in the program is actually climate change. On the program, if you look at it, I think 1 is values, 2 is do you have the order there, someone? I wrote this thing. No, just say it. 2 is which one? Digitalization. 3 is okay, the economy. Then 4 is probably climate change. 5 is migration, and 6 is security. Yeah. So it's one of my top ones, and I call in that for decarbonization of Europe in 2045. My big worry, obviously, is that climate change at the rate at which we are doing it now, 0.2 degrees per 10 years, and then overshooting to 2 degrees by 2100 is simply too much, and the Earth will not be able to sustain this. And if the population of Africa in 2100 is 4 billion, then it's going to be, then the migration crisis in 2015 will have been a walk in the park, and we won't be able to sustain it. So that's why I would like to see Europe take leadership in climate change. Obviously, it did so in Paris. Is that enough? I don't know, but that would certainly be one of the big priorities, and something that all of us can nowadays agree on. But I don't make a claim that us bringing down emissions will solve the climate crisis, because only 10% of emissions in the world come from Europe. So at the end of the day, we should be the ones developing the type of technology that then can reduce emissions and therefore reduce the rate of global warming. And that's what I put in the program as well. But I do think that this is one of the key issues also for the future of humanity.
But also you need for that foreign policy to pursue this goal, because otherwise even technologies will not be enough. There was, I guess, one more question. Please, Mike.
So hi, my name is Peter Mathieu, and I'm a member of Top 09 Youth organization, and I wanted to ask something more about Europe and the Central East Europe, because what I think that with the Brexit, the West kind of realized the importance more, the people there, but I don't think that this happened here, and I do believe that the only thing that the populists in Czech Republic are not against the European Union or Eurosceptical is that the business of the Prime Minister is getting huge donations of money. So what do you think will be the breakage? Because I cannot see the way out for the Central and East here.
First observation is to take the big picture and look at the bright side, look at the silver lining, because sometimes we have a tendency to pay too much attention on what's going on right now, which basically impedes us from looking back, say 20 years, or looking ahead 20 years. I always say, as an amateur peace mediator, that every crisis, every situation is always solvable. What has been started by humans can be solved by humans. And it's always very important to compare and contrast what is going on. So look back 20 years and ask yourself, what was the Czech Republic like then? Or even 30 years. And then you will very soon notice that, the Czech Republic is doing a hell of a lot better than what it was doing in 1989, 1999, 2009, and then what it will look like in 2019. And then you juxtapose that and think, okay, with current predictions of growth rates and development and so on, what will life be like in 2029, 2039, 2049. And suddenly you realize that, okay, you know, whew, we'll survive this, we'll be fine. Now, then the more concrete answer to that is that it is something that I've been thinking about as well. You know, why hasn't the reactions of Brexit been stronger in terms of EU popularity or others in some of the Central and Eastern European countries? And I wonder whether one of the reasons is that people in the heart of their hearts see that, shoot, we're actually losing quite a close ally. You know, those Brits, they were pretty fair with us. They allowed for free movement of labor. On top of that, they like economic reform, and you know, we're a little bit Anglo-Saxon and the way in which we think about things. And then they think, is this going to be a Europe dominated by, for lack of a better term, old Europe? And this is when, you know, people get a little bit afraid. I'll add one more point to this, and I don't know if this is a good one or a fair one. Because I don't know the stats and facts of migratory movements in the Czech Republic or in Slovakia, but would I be correct in assuming that you're now moving towards net migration in the sense that some people are starting to come back who left at an earlier stage to the United Kingdom, for instance, and thinking, okay, it's time to come back, and they come with a certain type of a line or DNA. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I must say that there is, and you know, I'm always very careful to analyze what's going on in the host country where I am, but it has always perplexed me a little bit why Euroscepticism is fairly strong in the Czech Republic. You know, does it have to do with ice hockey, or you know, or does it have to do with the fact that you had a very Eurosceptic president for many years who pushed a negative line on European Union, or is it just sort of, you know, slightly, I don't know, bohemian skepticism about stuff, about, you know, a fear of someone bigger ruling you? I really don't know. But of course, I would want to see a very engaged and pro-European Czech Republic, because I think, you know, the European Union needs countries that understand ice hockey.
You know, I guess, Alex, the key is in the terms that you mentioned maybe half an hour ago, and this is the emotion. Because if you look at the recent Eurobarometer, we are by far the most Eurosceptical, more than UK. If you ask people if they understand and see the benefits EU, then you get almost twice as much. So that means that there is some kind of rationality. That rational line is there, and I guess if you ask people if EU means for them better job and better professional chances, I guess we are in top 3 in Europe. But we are the most Eurosceptical if you ask people if they like it. So that means there is someone, and I have suspicion, just a short name of maybe 150 names, that are just spreading this negative emotion, you know. So we basically somehow understand, but we have negative emotion. We don't like it. There are things that you think are good for you, but you don't like them. And that's why I guess we should talk to people not only with the hard facts and statistics and so on, but we should try to create that positive emotion. This is what we talk about. But probably last question, because we really should finish. And going back to that, your triathlon hobby. So focusing on the last third of triathlon. So how big is, in your view, chance that, let's say that EPP gets the victory in the elections and will be strongest group in the European Parliament? So what will decide if so-called Spitzenkandidat of EPP will become actually chief of commission? What will be the decisive factor in your mind?
Well, I think, first of all, if you had an algorithm that was trying to predict the 5 big jobs next year, the algorithm would have to be fed a code which says that the person who wins in Helsinki in 3 weeks, the EPP lead candidate race, is the most likely to land commission president. I mean, that's quite clear. All the other ones are up for grabs. You know, it's going to depend on gender, country of origin, age, experience, you know, whatever. Whereas this one is pretty clear. Now, how is the EPP going to do it? If and hopefully when the EPP gets most seats in the European Parliament, it will have to most probably form a coalition. I'm not going to predict the split between, you know, anti-European, pro-European parties, but one thing is for sure, that the election result is going to be probably as messy as it has been in all European countries over the past, you know, almost 10 years. I mean, you've had it here in the Czech Republic, we've had it in Finland, Belgium, Germany, Italy, you name it. It's very difficult to form coalitions. I would, of course, personally like to see a pro-European moderate center coalition, which would of course mean that the EPP would cooperate with parties such as ALDE and probably socialists and Democrats as well, even the Greens, yeah. And this could perhaps create a moderate force inside the European Union. Now, I'm a Finn, and we have never had one-party governments. They have always been coalition governments. Usually it used to be two big in government and one in opposition. Now it's a little bit more fluid. The worst experience in my life I had was with 6 parties in government and 2 in opposition. So I hope we don't have that in the European Parliament, but I would of course like to see moderate forces win the elections. But this does not mean that we should completely reject you know, populist movements or anti-European movements. We have to cooperate with them as well, and we have to understand, you know, what they're all about, and then try to find solutions. Final thing, the EU is never going to be perfect. It's always going to be imperfect, and we're just going to have to start living with imperfections.
This is from Christian Democratic Party, that is closest to God, that makes the perfect thing. So you are quite skeptical, I must say. But this is only one half of the equation. The other will be acting of the Council. So what do you think the Council will do?
Well, I think it depends on who the lead candidate is. You know, I'll be very frank with you. If the lead candidate is someone who the European Council members know, who has been a sitting prime minister, who you know, has been a finance minister and the rest of it, then it's probably much easier. Well, put it this way, much easier for the European Council to nominate that person, and much more difficult to reject that person.
This was originally intention of Angela Merkel, wasn't it?
You mean getting someone to reject or getting someone to approve?
Getting someone with experience that can be approved by the council.
Yeah, that's the basic. And I think actually in the EPP party congress or something like that, there was a paper once approved with 3 points on the candidature. Had to be pro-European, had to have executive experience, and then there was a third criteria for it as well. But, you know, rules change.
Anyway, it will be quite messy.
It'll be messy, but we'll muddle through.
One part of that. Anyway, so once more, first of all, thanks all of you for coming here on Friday afternoon on such a short notice. Alex, I highly appreciate you coming here, being so open, being willing, or not more than willing actually, talk to people and to speak here as a person. Maybe you will be next chief of the commission, maybe you will be in other post, but I'm sure you will stay the same person. And that's why I really believe this is not last time when we can see you in Prague. So
I'll be back.
So thank you very much to all of you, and maybe see you in other occasions sometime soon.
Thank you. This was fun. Thanks.
So now you can get a little bit of drink, a little bit of eat, but then please excuse Alex, because he will relatively soon run to the airport. So thank you.